Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. We are back with more D&D advice. I'm sorry that I haven't done this in a while. I accidentally stumbled into reading Hoard of the Dragon Queen, and it seems to have knocked me unconscious. I would burn the book in revenge, however I'm afraid that it would survive and come for me in the night. Anyway, today we are back with more red flags. Red flags are something that come up a lot on RPG horror stories, and yeah, I figured we'd talk about them for a third time. We did another round of bad D&D advice, and I figured let's do another round of red flags. I just saw a great thread on RPG horror stories where people went over and discussed some major red flags in their D&D games, and I saw some new ones that I might want to discuss. Having fun is kind of important when you're playing a tabletop role-playing game, and yeah, being able to identify bad things that could ruin said fun is pretty important. So without further ado, let's get started. My character has single-handedly killed entire armies, is the child of a god, has never lost a fight, etc, blah blah. You're level 3, and you just got decked by a drunk kobold. Shut up. I'm sure we've talked about this one before because this is a major red flag. This is a precursor to a lot of main character syndrome. It's also what a lot of people complain about when they're complaining about long backstories, aside from DMs who just don't want to read a 10-page backstory. This does come up. This is definitely a problem in some D&D games. Some people get really carried away when they're writing their backstories, especially new players, but old and experienced players too. It is completely natural that when you're really excited about writing a character, about playing a new character, you can get carried away. Everyone has probably done this at some point. If not in Dungeons & Dragons, then somewhere else. This is normal, but it is something that we need to work to curtail. We can't be the main character, and when you're playing an adventure like D&D, the most important thing is to have the story play out at the actual game. If your character has already claimed an epic sword, slain many dragons, and was part of an epic war where he turned the tide of battle, where does the character have to go now? Also, there is the dissonance of often D&D games starting at a lower level. So if you have all these epic deeds already under your belt, how does that even work when you're getting, again, like the OP said, decked by a kobold? Since we're on the topic, I've already discussed long/short backstories, and honestly, it's up to DM preference. There's nothing wrong with having a long written backstory. I don't think that that is a problem. If you really want to write 10 pages about your character, if that is something that you're invested in, great. Just make sure to include a TLDR, because I probably don't have all day to read a 10-page backstory and issue corrections on lore stuff, etc. Overall, I don't know if this is a red flag, but more of a mistake. I think the real red flag here is if somebody is unable or unwilling to curtail that backstory when corrected by the DM. He's that mysterious, assassin-like character. So what's making him mysterious? He's wearing a mask all the time. That's it. Also black leather from head to toe. A dialogue I had exactly like that, just translated it into English, with a player a couple weeks ago. Ah yes, the terrible edgelord. Edgelords can absolutely be great. We've made multiple videos about lone wolf characters, edgelord characters. One of my first Tabletop Tavern tips that got decent views was a video where I talked about my favorite edgelords in fiction. We got your Caleb Widowgasts, your Percy Derolos in Critical Role. Those are great edgelords that really worked in those campaigns. A lot of people like them for a reason. They worked in the party and they weren't obtrusive. Here, though, we have an example of an edgelord who's just edgy for edgy's sake. There's nothing deeper about their character other than the mask that they wear or their brooding demeanor. That can be fun as like a one-time gag, but maybe not anymore after that. Now, I do feel like I'm kind of straying into a dangerous territory where I'm saying that every character needs to have a lot of depth and all of this backstory and all of this purpose behind them. And frankly, not every game is going to fit that kind of character. That is totally normal to have a character that's really simple. Maybe you do have just a brooding rogue and that's it for a one-shot, and that's great. Or maybe that's it for a full campaign. If that is the tone of the game, if that's what your party loves, then I see no problem there. However, if you are in a roleplay heavy, story-driven game, and you show up with a character who's just edgy for edgy's sake, mysterious, and not engaging with the rest of the party, you can really bring down the mood with that character. Maybe that's not the intention, but that is what's probably going to happen. If people are trying to roleplay and engage with your mysterious character to unravel the mystery behind them, and you're not letting them do that because of the brooding nature of the character, then what's the point at all? We play D&D to play with other people. We play D&D to have this story with a group. And if the edginess of a character is getting in the way of that, then that character needs some adjustments. Asks if Jesus is a deity that they can follow in the setting. Give me money or I'll kill you are the first words towards a quest-giving NPC. Anime protagonist names. I know that first one may seem like just a joke, but trust me, it's not a joke. There are people who say that, and there are people who never back down on it. But anyway, moving on from that, I think the most serious one of the lot is, again, similar to the edgelord type character, this is more the instigator, the person who's threatening everybody at knife point to get money, the person who thinks that D&D is like Skyrim. You can get away with whatever you want. A lot of DMs try to hold games to a more immersive standard, where actions have consequences. This game, a lot of this game, is making decisions, and the effects of those decisions, some of which will be negative effects. And somebody holding every quest giver up at knife point to get a little bit of extra gold, well, yeah, that's definitely going to have some consequence. There is a social contract entered by the DM and the players. The DM sets forth an adventure, and the players play in that adventure. The players, of course, can make their decisions, but if a player is going out of his way or her way to ruin the adventure for the rest of the players and for the DM, then that is a serious problem. That's breaking that social contract. Sure, the player technically has the freedom to make those decisions. This is D&D, you can make decisions, but those decisions should build the game, build the story, build the fun for the rest of the table. And if it just ruins what could be an epic adventure, then again, what's the point of making those decisions? Just like, what's the point of making this character from the previous red flag? As for the anime names thing, I don't have any experience with that. If somebody named a character after an anime, I would have no idea, considering I don't watch anime. If that's a red flag for you, I guess I respect it. And I also guess we will be moving on because I have nothing more to say on this topic. Players choosing to ignore or not engage with the DM/world, deliberately walking away from NPCs that are trying to talk, not letting the DM describe the room, scene, acting before the DM and or the party have a chance to establish what's going on, and my favorite, playing as if it were a video game. We just talked about the whole video game thing like 5 seconds ago, so let's instead talk about the engagement thing. Of course, DMs need to present players with something engaging, but at the same time, on the other side of that coin, players need to engage. If a player is interrupting before the DM can even finish their sentence, if a player is interrupting before the DM can even describe the room, if the DM finishes describing the room and the players just sit there waiting for the DM to like throw a monster at them or something, that is concerning. Now, of course, new players can fall into this just by principle of not being able to understand what's going on because they're new to the game, and that is normal. Sometimes DMs need to be a little bit more hand-holdy with new players. I think that's normal. That's something that I had to do a lot during my first few D&D campaigns. No one knew what was happening. Everyone was new, including me as a DM. So yeah, I did a little bit of hand-holding to like guide my players through those first few sessions. Eventually, after watching some live play shows and after getting some guidance during the games, they started realizing that they had the freedom to ask those questions. They had the freedom to engage, and then we had a lot more fun. Nowadays, I barely have to handhold at all. My players are now much better at engaging with the world, and that is the progression. However, if you're playing with experienced players and they're just not engaging in any way, then you have a serious problem on your hands. Engagement is a big part of the game, and if you're not engaging, then the game kind of falls apart, and it feels really rough for your dungeon master. I speak from experience. I've run games where I felt like the players were just completely out of it. They were not engaged in the game at all, and I felt really bad about it. At the end, I asked the players, like, hey, did I do anything wrong? Is there something wrong with the way I'm running the game? And they said no, everything was great, and that made me just feel really confused because they weren't engaging with what I had set up the entire session. So if I don't have a problem with my DM style, then why weren't you engaging in the first place? That's a problem I've encountered in a few groups, and it definitely is a red flag. If people aren't engaging with your game no matter what, and they're not offering you any ways to help make the game more engaging for them, then I don't really know what to say other than you might need to find new players, because engagement, like I've said so many times, is a necessary component of making a great D&D game. Constantly being a distraction. Everything must be a joke, often sexual, talking over the DM, showing people things on their phone while something is happening, whining when the dice ruin their turn every time another player rolls. I am surprised this does not come up more. The class clowns, the jokers, the peanut gallery. This is something that is very realistic and something I'm sure every DM has experienced. Now, of course, let's not beat around the bush. I don't think we should be banning jokes at the table. Jokes are going to be part of D&D. When you got a bunch of people hanging around each other, some people are going to make jokes, and you know what? That's great. I don't want a campaign where no one is joking ever. I think that would be kind of lame. However, when it gets incessant, when it's interrupting serious scenes, when other people's roleplay is being shut down because of a sex joke, then it gets pretty lame. That's when the DM should step in. That's when the DM's stern parent voice comes into play. Of course, as a red flag, I don't think that this means that you need to bail out in a campaign immediately. It's not that level of red flag. Some people just some days are more active, more jokey, more caffeinated than other days. Sometimes groups are going to be a little bit more jokey, and I think that that is okay as long as you're able to rein it in. If it is an ongoing problem, though, that's when it needs to be discussed, and that's when the red flags really start to show. If you've already discussed this with your peanut gallery, with your jokey player, and they're still not reining it in during serious moments, they're still interrupting other players, then you have an issue on your hands. This is especially a problem if the jokes are directed at another player's role-playing. That is really, really bad. If somebody's making fun of someone else at your table for taking the game seriously or for role-playing, then yeah, you have an issue on your hands, an issue that needs to be curtailed. You need to have a serious discussion with that player about when joking is okay at the table and when to tone it back a little bit. Also, freaking out about dice rolls, lame. Getting mad about dice rolls is not fun at all. I think XP to level 3 made a great video about this. Getting angry is not fun. I understand that dice rolls can be frustrating sometimes, but especially getting angry at other players, not warranted in any way. Definitely a red flag. Homebrew succubus race. I mean, I'm sure that there is a good homebrew succubus race out there, but I do tend to take a close and thorough look at homebrew created by players. I use homebrew a lot in my games, all the time, constantly. But I take a thorough look at it, and if a player sends me like their own homebrew, I make sure to take a fine-tooth comb through that. Don't want anything to fall through the cracks. I want to take a look at it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And yeah, the homebrew succubus race this guy's referring to was probably on the latter end of that spectrum. Receives campaign guidelines, immediately makes a character that goes against those guidelines. This is definitely a pre-game red flag for me. If I give you the guidelines for the campaign, if I give you what the campaign is going to be about, and your character does not fit into it at all, I think that it's not necessarily a instant ban red flag or anything. It is a correction red flag where I talk to you about it and be like, hey, this character probably isn't going to fit into the game. Can we change them a little bit to help them fit into the setting a little bit better? The real red flag for me is denying those changes entirely, denying any discussion. I am playing this character no matter what, and you cannot stop me. First and foremost, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't create a character that fits into the campaign. If you create a character that in no way melds into the game, you're going to have a harder time engaging with the story that the DM is presenting. You're going to have a harder time engaging with the other players who did create characters that fit into this world. It's just going to be a more difficult roleplay experience for you in general. You're shooting yourself in the foot. On top of that, your DM is going to be working a little bit overtime to help your character to fit in. So you might as well just take their critique before the game. Now, of course, I don't want DMs to become dictators of character creation, restricting everything to 2 options and that's it. But if your DM gives you a loose guideline like, hey, we're making good characters, or hey, we're making evil characters, or something along those lines, general guidelines, if you refuse those guidelines in every way, shape, and form, it's gonna be a rough situation, at least for me. I think creating characters that fit into the world is a good starting point for a D&D game, and it's going to help your DM out a lot. So try to at least generally stick to the guidelines your DM sets in place. It's going to make the game better for everyone at the table. And that is where we are going to end today's episode of RPG Horror. Wait, what? And that is where we're going to end off today's episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. Sorry if this seems a little bit hastily made. I had a collab scheduled for today, but things didn't work out and I had to come up with a new video concept, so here we are. If you guys enjoyed it though, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our RPG Horror Story series, where we look at the best of the worst of Dungeons & Dragons, and while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you cannot think of a comment, leave the comment reddest flag to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.